Glasgow was a highly significant player, city in the empire, really because of its industrial significance. It was major shipbuilder, major centre for heavy engineering. A lot of the infrastructure that went to sort of almost like sort of bind the empire together, particularly if you're thinking of railways. In fact, it's one of the cities, British cities, that's been called the second city of the empire, and for a very good reason. Most of the population in Glasgow really were what we'd sort of termed sort of working people, working class, and for them the whole idea of empire was possibly one of exploitation.
We Scottish soldiers have always had an excellent reputation in all aspects of soldiering throughout the world. We are, I think, loved and respected by our friends and feared by our enemies. That is a fact. There are many accounts of people who joined the army for adventure and for travel and to see new sights and defend their country at the same time. I think that the soldiers who were in the armed forces did think it was a noble profession, and I think their relatives did too. I think every city and every part of the United Kingdom saw a great increase to mobilise for the First World War. People thought it was a great adventure. They were going to defend the empire in support of king and country, and that it was all going to be over by Christmas. That was not the reality of it. You've probably seen that picture with Lord Kitchener's pointing and saying your country needs you. People took that very seriously, and they flocked to the recruiting offices in their droves, and that is not an exaggeration. So battalions were formed from people who came from different walks of life. The 15th Battalion, the HLI, was the Tramways Battalion, and that is people who were all driving the trams in Glasgow and conductors and all the rest of it. And the 17th Battalion were the Chamber of Commerce Battalion, or the Glasgow Commercials. They were formed from business people who worked in offices and clerks and that sort of thing, and the stock exchange and whatever, and they all joined together. And of course many of them were killed together, which was one of the great tragedies.
In particular, things to think about is the effect of actually sort of losing so many of its population.
In fact, it's difficult to imagine them nowadays. What you have to remember was that on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, in the 1st of July 1916, which was a terrible day for the British Army, we lost 59,000 casualties before midday. It just puts it in perspective. That would be a large part of this part of Glasgow.
A lot of men came back, you know, emotionally traumatised and physically disabled by the war.
We did learn a hell of a lot from the First World War, which was a terrible war. It was a war of attrition. You had these great trench lines all the way across northwestern Europe, and we learnt that the tactics we'd used there were totally wrong for the weapons.
Glasgow was seen as possibly what we could maybe call sort of a hotbed of revolution. So there was a lot of beginning to be sort of tension in the city.
There was a lot of unrest in Glasgow in the 20s, but that was really something that was happening all over the Western world.
The government became really, really anxious about what was happening, brought tanks. That's a period when there was sort of tanks were ready to roll into George Square to quell the masses workers there. Army was on alert. So it really did seem at that point that this might be sort of a flashpoint where Britain or Glasgow would sort of tip into the revolution that would have been seen in Russia a couple of years before that.
But I think it had a profound effect on Glasgow. But it had a profound effect everywhere because it was a world war, and most families knew of or had someone in the family who had either been killed or a life-changing injury.